is exciting. You know, I haven't shared a lot of good news, but here's some really good news. And that is, if you can read this chart, 1.3% of people in the United States or households own horses. 1.3%. That's an itty bitty little number. But if you add in participants, it takes it to 16%. And if you add in households that enjoy horses, maybe there are people that grew up with them and no longer have access, or maybe their grandfather, told them stories of when he owned horses, but that is a third, almost, of U.S. households. Our memberships are declining, but there is a big pool, 30 times pool of people out there who have the potential to get excited about what excites us, to care about the welfare of horses, to care about what's happening with the horse industry, and to be a part of it, to be engaged in it. How do we make that happen? Along with the shared challenges, we've got a lot of shared goals. We're seeing some really bright spots right now. We're going to give some examples and talk about some things that are going on that I think are really cool. But we all want sustainability. We still want to be here, not just in 100 years, but in 5 years. And I will tell you that I personally know of some organizations, not in this room, I don't know if they will be. Why? Because they're trying to preserve the past instead of creating the future. Simplification. We cannot continue because we have to do more with less. We have got to find ways to change so that we can bring more of what we have to offer to the marketplace and not struggle just to spend our money on survival. And finally, we've got to look at new revenue and financial models. If most of our money has been coming from memberships, then we've got to figure out what other sources of income we can generate. Or are there alternative kinds of membership that lead us to new revenue streams? And we'll give some examples of those going forward as well. So pedal back to Julie saying, we're calling this Ride the Wave. And I really have to give credit to Julie because when I talked to her on the phone the first time, she said, I want them to ride the wave. I'm like, that's it. That's what we're going to call this because it's really relevant. But what's the wave? What wave are we riding? Yes, we're riding the wave from the pandemic, but more so, we're actually riding the wave of growth. We are no different than any other organization that has a business cycle. And what that means is every organization goes from startup to growth and often maturity and decline. It's inevitable to some extent because the world's changing. If we took a business model created 20 years ago, and you guys are much older than that, and looked at it 20 years later, think of all the change that occurred in that time frame. If that business never changed, would it be relevant? Probably not. Somebody would have created a new model. Somebody would have come up with a better idea, the better mousetrap, right? So we have to change. We don't have a choice, or we experience that backside. Now, when you have organizations as old, that's not a very nice word, as established as you guys in this room, you actually are outside the norm. Because the norm for this timeline for publicly traded companies has shrunk by 70% in the last 50 years. Surprising? I hope not, because technology, shifts in values, economic cycles, all of those things bring to bear the fact that companies rise and fall. And we're getting ready to enter a really tough economic cycle. It's going to have a big impact on us. And we cannot just hope that our members come back when gas prices, fuel prices, hopefully, eventually go down. We need to be doing other things to help retain their engagement. So one question I have for you, and you don't have to answer this out loud, I won't put you on the spot. Where is your organization on that growth curve? If you're still in growth, you're probably pretty rare. If you are trying to stave off maturity and decline, you're probably more typical. But I will tell you that statistics say that if an organization has been in decline for 10 or more years, only 20% of them recover. Do not let that be you. So let's say that most of these organizations are at the top, right? We're either on the pinnacle of growth and we're trying to stretch it out, or maybe we're just going on the top side of maturity. How do we stay fresh? How do we stay alive? How do we change where we take that curve? Because you have two choices, and it is a choice. Do not believe it's not a choice. It's absolutely a choice. You either choose to live the life you've always lived, to honor the values you've always had, to keep the processes and the product that you offer the same because you have a legacy that you own, and you slow the roll. You find ways to intervene and to make it a little bit better and a little bit less harsh and save a little money here and save a little money there. But the end game is still inevitable. Or you choose to look at the world differently, to take what you have, the best of what it offers, the things that are true 100 years ago and true today, and you build on that. And you reimagine that. And that's the wave I would love to see you ride. I will tell you both tracks are hard. In fact, in my opinion, the bottom track is harder because you are working blood, sweat, and tears just to try to stave off decline. And it's hard. It's hard emotionally. It's hard physically. I would much rather embrace a different future, one that builds on our legacy, our strength, and our capabilities, but is willing to change enough to be relevant to a broader world. But the choice is yours. So this is the ideal growth wave, right? You get to the top, you reinvent. You get to the top, you reinvent. You get to the top, you reinvent. That's what we're here to do today, is figure out how do we do that. So that's the wave I want you to ride. Now let's talk about how we ride it. Let's ride that wave. So we need to reimagine. We need to reimagine what we can be in the future to a broader group of those 30% of horse enthusiasts. We need to innovate. We need to come up with new and different ways of doing things. We need to deliver. We need to make sure we don't just talk about it, but we do it. And sometimes that's the hardest part of all. And then we need to engage. We need to make sure that all the stakeholders, the target folks that we want to pursue, we have ways of making sure that they're enthusiastic as much as we are. Remember that shared passion we felt at the beginning? That's what we want to spread.
I believe that in our space, we often go out and hire consultants or contractors who don't speak horse. And so we go up this learning curve trying to teach them the lingo and to understand the way our business model works. And if we could consider embracing the idea of a shared services model where we've already got a panel of experts who have worked in this space and understand how these things work. There's obviously economies of scale and a lot of opportunity for us to take a smoother path into the implementation of some project or program that we're trying to roll out. Clay, I'm kind of curious, since you've been down this path, talk a little bit more about what kind of conversations you had to have within your space to get yourselves to the point of building a shared services model, because I do think it's a bit of a stretch sometimes for organizations to decide that they are willing to trust one another enough to go in together to build this kind of a model.
Well, I'll start with the formation of NSR in 1994, and it really wasn't, there were conversations, but it goes back to the point of it was necessity. The associations, the industry of where it was at, there was going to be real struggles with the long-term sustainability. And so working through the dynamics of today and even working through partnerships like we're doing with the American Berkshire Association now and getting closer with certified pedigree swine, I'll go back to Kristen's point. You've got to be very open and transparent about where you're at with things. And that's really hard sometimes for, at least we see in competing associations. Just to kind of lay the level of the land, we're kind of seen as big brother, or the scary folks that are in the swine industry as far as the pedigree side of things. And CPS, we've sat down and had several conversations of, well, we don't know if we can work with you all because we don't want you to ramrod everything. And I literally was in a meeting a year ago with their leadership team, and I said, can you describe to me 2 to 3 examples of how we've made you feel that way? And they said, well, you haven't. That's just been the perception of what our members think and what our boards say and all this. And I said, well, these are the conversations we have to have. We have to sit down as leadership and as staff and as boards and have these tough conversations and realize that, going back to our example of our show in Des Moines, we set everything aside. We set down all the perceptions to make sure that we could have an event for 5 days in Des Moines, Iowa, without getting it shut down and without making sure that everybody had a safe, healthy event. And we were able to accomplish that. But the way we were able to accomplish that was we didn't worry about if NSR was going to get credit for the event. We didn't worry if CPS was going to collect 25% of our trailer sales in terms of unloading. We worried about putting on the event. And so I think starting at a place of openness and transparency is key. And then the difficult part, as you're alluding to, and I think still one of the things as a watch out is you just have to be aware and find out what the perceptions and what the challenges are, whether they're real or not, and have those discussions. And we're in a place that we feel like there's been some leadership changes at the association, and we found that there's been some perception and reality of miscommunication, and those things don't happen unless you sit down and have the conversation. It goes back to just having those real tough, crucial conversations, and that's what makes it happen.
Was there another question out there? I thought I saw another hand. Hey, hi, Justine.
Hi. So in that shared model that you're presenting, do you offer a la carte type services? For example, if an organization has just one particular project that might need a team of experts in multiple ways, for example, to analyze the data, and then somebody in marketing to put it into an infographic sheet, et cetera, would you tackle just one project, or would you need an annual contract for a bigger picture?
What do you guys do?
Sorry, I don't want to be a mic hog, but that sounds like me again. We do a custom contract for every association that we do business with. So it's usually not the same for any two. But if someone says, for example, we need to do a membership campaign, and of course there's going to be a heavy marketing component to it, and we want the data analyzed throughout the year of this project. And by the way, we need the website updated with the new members, so I would have a team of 4 tackle that. And we would do a contract, and we would have our marketing team work with Christine, the data analytics, work with an admin who can help with a calling campaign, and a member strategy specialist. We would estimate the time it's going to take, come up with an typically annual contract, and then measure it. And 9 times out of 10, contract is renewed and renewed again. We have some clients decades. So it can start out as an a la carte thing, and then it just really doesn't make sense to start over. But we also have one-time projects, and if we go into it knowing that, as an example, Feather, we trained Ashley how to use it. She's doing awesome, but if Ashley gets too busy, she can hand it back to Clara, and Clara will take off with it. So that's the flexibility of it that is really beautiful. We're trying to equip nonprofits, do as much as they want on their own, but we're here creating it, backfilling it as needed.
I think that's a perfect example. I was just thinking that in the back of my head. I wear many hats, but I'm not great at all of them. And having the help of NPR with helping with the marketing, helping with our social media, they've been, coaching me through that, so it's been super helpful.
And Justine, I'll tell you a quick story. When I decided that we wanted to try to find a resource to help us with some marketing and some social media, I put it out to bid and got connected to Kristen, and she came to me and she said, here's this really robust plan for how we would do this, and here's the price tag. And I said, I don't have that kind of money. So what can we do with this amount of money? And she totally scaled it back and said, okay, we'll do this piece if you guys are willing to take on this piece so that I can give you what you're looking for within the budget that you have. And I think Clay has probably got a similar example where they get asked to do things for various parts of their industry, and they're going through the same process.
Well, I was going to say to kind of tie in those two questions together, and I think Kristen will agree with me. One, if you're looking at someone that won't come in and at least sit down and get a general understanding of your business, that's probably not somebody you want to work with. And that's what we've experienced as we work through our pedigree software and IT business is a lot of folks come in and say, this is the solution, and we really want them to know us and become a true partner in that. The second piece is what we've, and again, I'm tying it back, and you can probably comment on this, Harold, with our IT services that we've worked on is we've started in a place where we need you to do X, but we had no idea that your company did Y and Z as well. And so the folks that we're contracting currently to work and upgrade our new pedigree system also have now become our IT data security third-party group because we learned that they had those services and then compared them to what we were having internally and realized we were far outdated, we were far behind in terms of where we need to be, and not to mention we were paying twice as much as what we could do to outsource it. So I think those kind of organic conversations are really good to have.
Yeah, I add to that as well. Getting to know your client and your customer is extremely important on any project, no matter what size it is. We basically always go through a discovery initiative or an ideation initiative with our clients, and a lot of times you could spend a good portion of time equivalent to what it actually takes to build it, almost equal amount of time on the discovery. And the more time you spend up front, the better product, the better success you have.
We at Piranha are very proud to announce that we are now joined the American Horse Council along with our sister company Adeptus. You know, our beliefs have always been to take care of the horse first, which aligns perfectly with the American Horse Council, and that they're there every day fighting for the rights of all breeds and really all disciplines. Here at Piranha, we pride ourselves in taking care of the animals that we love so much, and with Piranha, certainly we take care of those flying and biting insects that aggravate our animals. And so we're very aggressively pursuing the best formulations. The Ultimate Protection Collection, for example, our oil base, our water base, our all-natural zero bite, and our aerosol. All four of these products in the Ultimate Protection Collection protects our animals, along with our Spraymaster system that is installed in many barns across the country. No matter what breed you have, Adeptus is going to take care of your horse on the inside, and it's certainly going to show on the outside. So with Piranha and Adeptus, just like the American Horse Council, we're going to continue to protect your horse and keep them healthy.
The first thing I want you to write are two words: start and stop. To be the best version of yourself, to live your best life, there are things that all of you need to start doing today and stop doing today. Another pro tip, if you're not writing, that is a great way to get me to call on you. Pro tip, for that. So, what are the things that you need to start doing today and stop doing? On the stop side, maybe it's stop opening that second bottle of wine every night, or stop having a cocktail every night. Maybe it's stop working with that toxic partner you have, or engaging with a friend that's an energy vampire. So write a couple things that you need to stop doing. When you write these things, be intentional with the words that you say. Don't write, I hope to stop drinking one day. I stopped drinking today. And then if you're struggling with something to write on the start side, there are 3 things that everyone in this room needs to start doing today. The first is some form of mindfulness. The second is our health, and that includes the fuel that we put in the body and how we move our body. And the third is sleep. I will talk about why it's important to do all of these, but sleep is the essential part, and most of us, who, raise your hand if you go to bed or wake up like the woman in this stock photo. So that means half of you are liars. So the reason that I chose this stock photo intentionally, two reasons. One, the blue light that your device emits inhibits your brain's ability to release serotonin, which we naturally need in our circadian rhythm. And the guys at Apple and gals at Apple have gotten pretty smart and can make it to where you can filter that blue light out, but it doesn't change the fact that your brain is processing billions of pixels every second. Netflix and chill is an oxymoron. Nature and chill is reality. So stop doing this. The second piece, the last 10 minutes before you fall asleep and the first 10 minutes after you wake up are a very magical time where we can hack your subconscious and we can put things in there to manifest. So the last thing you need to be doing is watching the news right before you go to bed with all the tragedies that we're facing, or looking at social media or somebody else's fake Instagram life and wishing you were more like them. Be very intentional with this magical time that you have. We're going to do a little hack later. But I want you to start with the 10-10-10 morning routine. Who here has a meditation practice? Second prize, and my only last prize. So the reason that meditation is so important, this is the winningest table ever.
That's why we're up front.
Yes, overachievers. Meditation gives you a greater sense of self-awareness, it reduces your stress and anxiety, increases mental clarity, and it triggers your brain's relaxation response. The journal that you have is based on neuroscience and positive psychology. This is not just based on my opinions. Kristen knows my ad agency, one of my favorite sayings was, if we have facts, we'll use facts. If we have opinions, we'll just use mine. So all of this is based on facts and not opinions, okay? So after you do your meditation, then we want you to read to start your day. It's going to help you retain information, continue to reduce stress by reducing your cortisol, and then lower your risk of Alzheimer's dementia, which we're all going to live to be 130 years old, so we want to make sure our brains can keep up with our bodies, and then alleviates anxiety and depression. And then the last piece, the journaling for the day, I want you to imagine when you're journaling that your home, your grandparents' home, your grandchildren's only legacy of you will be reading these pages.
So here's what we know. For young people that are active, these are the lifelong outcomes that we will see. I don't think any of these things are going to surprise you, but on average, better academically, less likely to face risk factors, better health outcomes, they live longer, more productive at work, more productive long-term in education. These benefits are at the individual level. When you think about them in aggregate, think about the benefit to communities. We have incredible amounts of research that are showing when communities are more active, the outcomes across the community are great. You know, lower heart disease, economic development opportunities. And on average, these investments are not significant, about $20 more per resident when they're making massive investments in the physical and programmatic infrastructure to provide sport and health opportunities. So before I talk about this slide, I know we have a lot of young people in the room, and I'm hoping one of them in the back might stand up and say, why do you participate in your sport? Why do you ride horses? I'm not afraid to call on someone. Oh, yes, right here.
One of the main reasons I ride horses is for a sense of community. I've really met my best friends through the sport, and I think it's also fun to be active. I tend to be more productive through my other sports in school as well, and it just really sets me up well for my day.
Awesome. So now I want to transition to kind of what we have to help folks think about this and how to reverse some of these trends that you've heard. And the research that I shared with you is just a snippet of all the data that we have on our website, but I think it's a good start. So we are focused on this idea that every child deserves access to a quality sport opportunity. We know the people that make a difference, and I'll talk about them in a second. And we have a framework, a set of strategies in which communities can organize around to think about increasing access to quality sport opportunities. So this is our Children's Bill of Rights in Sports. It's a guidepost for anyone who is a sport provider to think about what are the things that matter to young people. Of course, we start out with the right to play sport, but you look at some of these things, how do you create a safe and healthy environment? What does it mean to have quality program leaders? What does it mean to treat a young person with dignity? What does it mean to create developmentally appropriate play? Again, these could be sport-specific things, but when we think generally, these are good guideposts for programs to think about how to create that quality opportunity. And if you go to our website, you can see some of the examples of what people have been creating.
What we found is over obviously about a 20-year period, we saw prices for horses being very stagnant, maybe a slight increase, not quite the pace of inflation, until about the last 6 to 8 years, where some things have just dynamically changed. What we also learned is there is an interesting need for some sort of repository where we can capture more of this information. Because what we're finding is that the prices that these horses are beginning to bring, people need to be able to research those things, look at pedigree, look at performance, look at behavior of a horse, look at the health and well-being of the horse, and be able to make some decisions based on the longevity and the prospective performance and longevity of that horse. And so we think there's a dire need for that. We're challenging our students to start to build that database. So what we're seeing is a very explosive market, particularly in the last 6 to 8 years that we were riding. I don't want to leave out the Quarter Horse Racing Group. Heritage Place yearlings have increased 2.8 times, $12,000 in 2011 to $34,000 in 2021. So there's a great deal of investment, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of our take-home message that our students are identifying from our marketing class.
In looking at how the horse industry works, back in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, AQHA was experiencing a lot of growth at that time, and just so happened in 1984, there was a record high registration numbers of 169,000. We had a recession happen right about the same year. And so those horses registered in 1984 and 85 were the mares that were bred the 2 previous years. And so you had a little while that you were still increasing the numbers. Well, when you have a large number of horses and the money dries up through the recession, the market goes down, a lot of people get out of the breeding business, reshape what they're doing. And we got that back down to about 100,000 a year around 1990. The 90s were good, came back to the end of the 90s, and we started seeing another strong growth. We were doing the AQHA World Show at that time. It was experiencing steady growth every year. We have 525 horses in that sale and had to turn down 50 to 100. So, I mean, there was a lot of enthusiasm for getting horses out on the market. At that time, I think the American Paint Horse Association, with the enthusiasm around the black and white horses and all, was up in the 50 to 60,000 horses a year registered at that time. Kept cruising right on up. In 2006, AQHA had about the second highest number. It had 164,000 registered. And then we had the recession in 2007. Well, that seemed to change a lot more people than the first one did, because our registration numbers, and Craig can kind of correct me if I'm wrong, we dropped down probably over the last 7 to 8 years around 70 to 75,000 horses a year being registered. So we hit a plateau there, but it reduced the number of horses out in the market. And I think what we're seeing in the market strength right now is where there's a little bit of a short supply of horses out on the market. We're finding that those low breeding numbers have put fewer horses in the market. They have put fewer horses in training. And with some things that have developed here recently, it's driven this horse market because there's not as many broke horses out there as we needed. Why are we needing so many? I think that's one of the aspects of the pandemic. I had a lot of horse traders tell me that they'd have a family come in to look at horses, and they'd say, you know, kids can't play softball or soccer this summer. We want to go ride horses. So they would buy a group of horses to go ride.
And so You know, I remember going to auction and buying horses running loose or being ridden through for $25, $100, over and over and over and over for quite some years. And so I've been able to watch it from the lowest point and then to see it now. And as a horse rescue, some of the interesting things, and it's a different market, it's a totally different thing than, you know, what they deal with, but numbers still kind of the same, different amount of zeros, you know. But what I started to see was when we started asking people, you know, just learning how to build an organization to apply for a horse, trying to get people to put an application to adopt a horse when the market was the way that it was impossible. I just thought, well, how are we ever going to get these horses homes? So, and now, I think in the last 24 months, we've processed over 1,000 applications. The amount of the adoption fees that we could ask when I started in 2009, really trying to adopt horses, was $250, and for a sound, rideable horse. And now, you know, our fees are, when we set them, not talking about the ATFO event, you know, are $800 to $1,000. So it's small numbers, but it's a substantial increase. But the thing is, we could adopt out as many of those horses as we could get in. So it's been interesting to go from nobody being willing to fill out an application to getting so many applications that we can't even process them. The thing, of course, we run into is we don't have the horses that people are wanting. Not that the organization never has them, but everyone wants a big, broke gelding, you know. And I would actually say, I think throughout history, even when the market was very, very bad, we very rarely had a nice big gelding come through, and that's still true today. So if you want to keep a horse safe, somehow like put a request in to the Lord and make sure you only have big geldings born, because
I would like to add, but keep your questions coming. I wanted to add that it's amazing to me, it doesn't matter if you, what breed, we are hearing all across the country, it's whether it's a saddlebred or a Morgan or an Arabian or whatever it is, the sale prices are up and sales are really, really brisk. Greg, I'm curious, your students, they've been really studying this. What you said you were going to share some of their takeaways.
Well, we've hit on a lot of them. There were about 5 takeaways that our group really kind of identified. The first one was just that. It's responsible breeding. And I remember about 2015 when I went to work with Dr. Blodgett as he was president of AQHA, one of his themes coming out was, hey, we need an industry that's responsible with breeding, right? If you see what's happened in terms of stallion incentive funds, people who actually own a stallion, that's dramatically dropped off. And I think we're at a different industry now where there is a planned mating. It's not a commodity mindset that's going into this. This is a planned mating. We understand what these genetics are going to deliver in terms of value with the right treatment and development of that colt. So, and it's expensive to breed mares these days. Not everybody's going to want to get in the breeding business, so that's going to put a little bit of cap on it. The second one was the growing incentive programs that we talked about, and that's kind of lifting that top end, and it's bringing those loose horses clear up with it. The third one is marketing advancements, and we just talked about digital marketing, Facebook marketing, transparency of the pedigree, of the performance of what this horse is. And that third one there is really driving people to do more research when they buy, and therefore they're willing to maybe pay a little bit more. So product transparency, if you want to do research, there's a lot of data out there that's available now on that pedigree that will allow them to make decisions. The fifth and final one is really about health and welfare advances that we've made. We are seeing a horse perform at a much later age than we used to, right? Mm-hmm. In every discipline. We are advancing the welfare of these horses nutritionally, through vet medicine technology, through all of the work that we're doing on lameness to try to keep these horses sound. And so those horses have an extra life beyond performance. And so those horses are coming back to us at the Temple Grandin Equine Center and becoming therapy horses. We're seeing growth in therapy. Yeah. We're seeing growth in that human-animal bond and what the horse is able to bring to human health. And so all of these 5 components are really kind of unveiled themselves as we begin to look at these different market segments. And I really am not too concerned yet about overproducing. I know quarter horse is going to be up probably 5%. There's going to be pushback. There's going to be, markets are adaptable. What we know about markets is that they adapt, and they adapt very radically. We're seeing it in the stock market today, right? This market will adjust and will immediately begin to adjust breeding. So I'm not sure, I agree with you. I think we're going to see some moderation moving forward.
Thanks for having me back. The first time I spoke at the American Horse Council annual meeting, let me get this out of the way, was around 1994, and I had been attending for years. And the topic in 1994, if you can believe it, was Equine Activity Liability Acts. But back then, there probably were only 24 of these around the country. The first was Washington, and the second was Colorado. But I'm glad to be here, and I recognize that this is a conference designed to bring us together. It's designed for unity, strength, collaboration, collegiality, education. But if there is one thing that should bring us together, it's something that's very common with horses, and that is liability. Does liability matter? Let's take a look. Oh, come on. Somebody probably got trampled in that one. Horses bite kids. We'll talk about liability waivers in kids. That can be a problem. Look at this one. Even a professional polo player, if you look, anybody in the back can't see, it looks like he's going to be dragged. His foot is still in that stirrup. Let's see if he extricates himself from the horse. We'll see what happens from there. And of course, horses bite, horses kick. This is something that we're dealing with in the industry, and there is nothing we can do about it because the most well-trained horses, the bomb-proof geldings, as everybody seems to want, the 16 hand types, are all capable of doing any of these things without warning. So is it important to understand and avoid liability? Well, when things go wrong, it sure as heck is important, because you look on the left and you see broken bones. But there's more to it, because as we know, when you look at the worst case scenarios in regard to horse-inflicted injuries, you're looking at head injuries, paralysis, death. All sorts of different things occur, and of course with them, you may look at lawsuits, which potentially cost this if you don't have enough insurance or if you have no insurance, but it could get even worse. Because if you're an association, you're thinking, hey, this isn't relevant to me, but it is to your members, because they believe they don't need insurance. They believe you have a state equine liability law, and many have called them a zero liability law. That's what they called it when I was at this conference in 1994. And I'm sure they still do that today. They'll lose their farm if an aggressive attorney collects a judgment. There's no insurance, but there's property. And that is something that is a risk. Does it happen very often? No. Can it happen? Absolutely. So the goal, the watchword, is to be proactive. Is liability relevant to equine associations? And by the way, in the back row, you may not be able to see it. That horse has a question mark on its face. But is liability relevant to associations? The answer is yes. Lots to go through here. Let's go, and they're off. Here's what I'm going to cover in the time frame that's left with me, which at this point is about 30 minutes. I would like to share with you a review of the Equine Activity Liability Acts that are now in 48 states around the country. 48 states. Second, as mentioned, I'd like to share with you, because I know we have an association contingent here, let's talk about risk management, things that you can know about, maybe in your own way, share with your membership. And then, of course, if there is time, questions. So let's get rolling. This is relevant to organizations and clubs, signs and contract language. There are signposting requirements in several of the laws. My chart that I put on the table will give you an idea of which ones. These are signs on the screen here from states that require the posting of warning signs. But watch out. The sign requirements usually say, this is the size of the letters that need to be on the sign. If in Pennsylvania people here, the sign needs to be, 2 feet by 3 feet. Some laws will actually affect color and say the sign has to be red, if you can believe it. The laws differ as to what the signs should look like and also what they say. And there's no interchangeability. So this is the legitimate stuff here. In the middle, you see Pennsylvania's warning sign requirement. Not exactly 2 feet by 3 feet, you get the idea. These are examples, though, of warning signs. Let's move on. These are not warning signs under the statute, but Julie Broadway shared with you that there are signs that talk about the American Horse Council strongly supports. That's the sign on the lower right-hand side. It's come up in my caseload a few times. There are people, organizations, whatever, selling a sign like you see on the lower right that says, notice, this is an equine facility, and it goes on to say language that isn't in any statute anywhere, but I'm sure Julie doesn't appreciate the language at the absolute bottom that says, this law is strongly supported by the American Horse Council. Yes, I'm sure Julie appreciates, as many of you do too, a law that is designed to strengthen the equine industry, to limit and control liabilities to some extent, but not when the sign is being purchased by people who are supposed to have signs like this. If this is what you're supposed to have, but this on the lower right is what you do have, you may be out of compliance. And some of you may be wondering, what if somebody is supposed to put up a sign like the ones we see here, but they don't? What happens? Well, there are some equine liability acts that do require the posting, like the one in the middle for Pennsylvania. My concern is if you don't have the sign posted and the law requires it as a condition to benefiting from the law, as a condition to the immunities, you've got a problem. A small number of states in the southeastern United States actually say in the laws that if you don't post your warning sign, and if you don't repeat the language you have to put in the contracts, you lose all liability limitations in these laws. So it can be seriously important. Jean Lagan back here may recall there's a case from our own state of Michigan where the stable had a sign posted, but a goat, the stable's goat, ate it off the wall. The goat ate the sign on the day that the person was struck by a horse, as the person was walking through a barn, horse stuck his head out and knocked the person over. There was a sign up, but it disappeared. Michigan was not one of those states, though, that said no sign, no benefit to the laws, and so the court said, hey, you know, that's close enough. That's substantial compliance. We'll give you a pass. So the compliance with the sign posting requirement can be critically important depending on the law and depending on the state. And hopefully somebody will stop selling these signs because it misleads people, and that's the problem I find.
Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. I'm sorry I'm not going to be actually there on the day. So I am Janet Patterson-Kane. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of the Morris Animal Foundation. And despite the New Zealand accent, which I hope you enjoy listening to, I'm actually sitting here in Denver, Colorado, and that's where our offices are based. So our foundation is focused on advancing the health of horses through science, among other species. We're really grounded in the science of animal health, so it's health that we are interested in, and we're wanting to bridge the gap between what's going on scientifically and what's going out there in veterinary practice. We're very devoted also to training early career scientists. And we're really looking to put money where money is needed. So the foundation's actually quite an old one. It is more than 70 years old and was established in 1948 by Dr. Mark L. Morris Sr. and his wife Louise. And Dr. Morris was actually a really innovative veterinarian in his time. He saw the need for veterinary research and animal health research. And the foundation started off just funding dog and cat studies. But by 1959, they started their first horse study. So we've been funding equine research for many decades now. Just giving you a look at what we funded in 21. So you can see here quite a large amount of funding in equine. We do try to balance the species out. This goes up and down between species year on year. But in general, we're spending more than $500,000 per year on equids. And I'm saying equids because we fund not only horses, but also donkeys and mules. And where relevant, we will fund research into wild populations. So we have a very exacting review process. Once things are submitted, we undertake an internal review, just make sure people have followed instructions, and then we try and take as many as we can into scientific review. We run a panel of at least 10 scientific experts. We now do that by Zoom. This is something COVID brought in, and it's worked very well. So we're continuing that. It means we can have international panels, which is really exciting. And we do actually fund globally. We sometimes bring in ad hoc reviewers, and by that I mean if we have something very specialized and we need some additional expertise, we bring someone in to look at that. And we like to have 1 or 2 veterinary practitioners who don't review, but they're there to have input on whether the projects we're looking at are relevant to them or not. Once these things have been scored and we've got a good idea of what we would like to fund, this has to be approved by our research oversight committee. They are members of our boards of trustees who have scientific expertise. And then we go into a second round of review because we take the use of animals in research and their welfare extremely seriously. We have a second board called the Animal Welfare Advisory Board who look at all the things that we're looking at funding. We have scientists on there with specific equine expertise, and we have people on there with specific ethics expertise. And there's usually a bit of to and fro there with the researchers to get this right. A proposal can fail at this stage. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And once we're satisfied with that, then we go into contracting. So it's quite a protracted process. This probably goes on for about 6 months or so. So why conduct research? And this seems like a very simple question to ask, but we need to constantly keep this in mind. And I really like this quote, which comes from a scientific paper. Ensuring that research is relevant and applicable to those who can improve patient care is essential. However, researchers do not always investigate areas or answer questions that are important to the end users. And this is something we've focused on very closely in the foundation, because it's very important not to have that divide. It's important that research solves problems for horses, horse owners, horse enthusiasts, and their veterinarians. So I just want to go through what we've been doing to try and address that. How can we increase our research impact? We need to bridge that gap. We need to gather and understand people's perspectives. We need to identify the research needs, and then we need to prioritize them. So where are we going to take our money first? It'd be lovely to get this from the horse's mouth. Unfortunately, we can't do that. What we can do is go to people who really know a lot about what's going on. If we look at a survey that the American Association of Equine Practitioners did in 2018, and they got a remarkable number of responses, actually. Veterinarians are extremely busy people, almost 450 responses. They identified as the most pressing research issue colic. And colic is a very generic term. It basically refers to abdominal pain, but very clearly up there, and certainly in the top 3 if the AAEP funded only one area. So very important to veterinarians. If we look at the American Horse Council's own survey, which also occurred in 2018 with around 600 responses, again, we see colic as the most pressing research issue. And if only one issue were to be funded, again, these owners were saying colic. And this is very typical. I always say that horse owners, horse enthusiasts know what they're talking about. They often get it bang on. They always agree with the veterinarians, or just about always when we're talking about research needs. So we went back and looked at our funding over the previous few years. And we found that colic was actually way down the list. With a lot of other things, we were really in line with what owners and veterinarians were saying, but not with colic. And it wasn't that these things were coming in and failing review. They just weren't coming in, proposals on colic, in large numbers, which was disappointing to us because we're not matching what stakeholders are looking for. Now, you could criticize that and say, well, that's just people's opinion. What is the real story here? Well, it's very clear in the USDA survey that was done in 2015 that colic is by far the #1 killer of horses between 1 and 20 years of age, pretty significant in our senior horses as well. So the owners, the veterinarians, they are seeing what's actually going on. We then conducted our own survey, again asking what topics of horse health do you think are important and that we should be funding, and again, #1 colic. So I think we can be very convinced that this is the #1 research issue, certainly in this country, in terms of the need for research. So what we did last year is we only accepted proposals on colic. We talked to our scientific advisory board and we agreed we would narrow that topic a bit because colic is just abdominal pain. So we focused on colic involving the intestinal tract, and we put in some subtopics of pathophysiology, which is basically how do these diseases develop, prevention and early detection, and nutrition and feeding. So we didn't allow any other topics, and that included our fellowships as well. We got a great response to this. So these are the projects that we are now funding. I'm going to go and talk about a couple of these, but I just wanted to point something else out here that's important when we're thinking about research. So you can see, for example, a project there on the role of inflammatory cells in post-operative ileus. And this refers to the fact that it can be a problem in horses after colic surgery, where basically the intestinal tract stops moving. So this is quite basic laboratory-based research. It might not necessarily seem very appealing to a horse owner, but there are things we need to know before we can go and solve these problems. We need to know what is going on. So there is this basic research that unlocks certain areas. And as long as the scientist is showing us what this pathway is going to be to this ultimately being useful, then I think that does bridge that gap that we were talking about. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about a couple of quite exciting projects in there. This one has been done in Australia. This is looking at transportation colic. So this is a very good example where we talk about transport, we talk anecdotally. Yes, some horses seem to be prone to colic when they're transported, but really, where is the evidence base here? What is actually going on? So these researchers are working with a commercial transportation company, and their hypothesis is that transportation does reduce the motility, so the movement of the intestinal tract, and that horses with the greatest reduction in this motility will recover less from transportation. What we're trying to do here is find what predicts those horses and what can we do about it to try and mitigate it. So they're going to be using non-invasive ultrasound to get images of the size of the stomach, of how motile their small and large intestine are before departure, immediately when they arrive, and after 2 hours recovery. So this is a really exciting area of research. It's going to be great to see the results because it lets us start to develop ways of stopping or preventing the issue. This is another exciting project. This is a collaboration between a university in the United Kingdom and a university in Colombia. This group in the United Kingdom did a lot of research looking at whether horse owners can recognize colic or signs of colic really early on. And they found actually a lot of horse owners weren't very good at this. And they embarked on quite a large education program because, as we know, the earlier we realize a horse is starting to colic, the greater the chance there is of intervening and having a successful result in many cases. So they're going to be assisting scientists in Colombia develop educational resources and workshops for equid owners living in underserved communities. So these will be working horses, and the training materials will focus on, what are the risk factors? What are the early signs of this? How can we treat it? This means that these materials will be translated into Spanish and easily transferable to other Spanish-speaking countries. Just an interesting point here, but recent research showed that 13% of Colombian working horse owners or working equid owners had experienced colic, and 21% said colic was their biggest health concern. So horse owners the world over really know what's going on and seem to have similar concerns. Okay, so another important question when we're thinking about, as an animal health research organisation, what do we do, is what is health? And that may seem like an obvious question, but actually it isn't. The 5 domains model is arguably, in the scientific community, the most widely accepted way of thinking about animal welfare. So in this system, we first think about physical or functional, what we call domains. So positive and negative aspects of what's going on for an individual animal in terms of the nutrition, in terms of the environment, in terms of physical health, and in terms of behavior. And with behavior, we're thinking, can the horse exhibit the behavior that is normal for that species? That is then all put together, and it is thought about in terms of the mental domain. So how is that horse feeling? Is that horse feeling good, bad, neutral? And if you think about it, when we're thinking about our own health, that is how we would think about it. Are we feeling good? Are we feeling bad? Are we feeling so-so? It's the same for animals. So this mental domain is very important. And so I would argue that health is not just physical health, as we've tended to focus on in the past, but it is all of these components. And ultimately, it's about how does that individual animal feel? So we have a program in the foundation where donors who have sufficient amounts of funds can have a call for proposals put out on a topic that means a lot to them. And we have a wonderful veterinarian called Dr. Wendy Koch, who came to us. She's actually qualified, board certified in animal welfare, as an equine enthusiast and owner. And she had been closely following equine behaviour and welfare research and regretted that funding in that area had been minimal. And looking at what had been coming in through our calls, we had actually seen very few projects on behaviour, and they didn't do very well in review. It is actually its own area of science, to be fair. So getting biological scientists or physical health scientists to look at this wasn't really doing it any favours. So Dr. Koch told us that she would like to run a donor-inspired call for proposals on behaviour. This is just the wording from it, but basically focusing on that behavioural domain that I was just talking about, including things like stereotypies, cognition, and learning, and not projects just using behaviour to measure other things. So this has actually been hugely successful. She was offering a $10,000 grant. It's been so successful that others that have come through, we've put our own money towards as well. This year we're going to our 3rd year of it, so it's become an annual occurrence. This is what we funded last time. I'm going to go into some of these projects. It was hugely exciting. I know the principal investigator for one of these is going to be talking at this conference, so I'll leave that one out. But a lot of horse owners have been really interested in what's going to come of these studies. Okay, so the first one is about human-horse interactions in these programs where we have animal-assisted interactions to help people. And we're often thinking about what's good for the people here and not whether the horse is actually consenting to be a part of this. And so they're hypothesizing that at least some horses are probably not consenting. But interestingly, that humans in those non-consensual interactions may not be having as great an experience, even if that's subconscious. And this is really an issue in many activities using animals. So we're really interested to see what happens in this study. This is going on in Canada at the University of Guelph. The second study is about mare stress at weaning. There have been studies on foals, but the mums are getting left out, or moms, as you would say in American lingo. So we're not thinking about this because mares, obviously out in the wild, they tend to keep the female foals in the herd. That's their family structure, and we're significantly disrupting this by taking them away. So their hypothesis is that mares with different levels of attachment to their foals will be differently affected by that. And again, we just need this data on this problem to see what is going on, how severe is the issue, and if there is one, it will then allow us to develop methods of mitigating it or making it easier on these animals, treating them as individuals. The third study is a study on nutrition. As we know, horses out in the wild pretty much feeding pretty much constantly. And we'd love to have this ad lib method of feeding. However, there can be issues with increases in body weight and wasting hay. So this is a study where they're going to compare horses with free choice, horses with a specific slow feeder, and box-fed horses. And look at what they're examining here. They're looking at how do the horses feel? What is that mental state? Circadian cortisol rhythm is something that indicates levels of stress. So how do horses feel? And again, this seems like something that if we had the data, owners would very easily be able to take some of these recommendations. And the final one I wanted to mention is looking at sleep quality and lighting. There's increasing data showing that horses can have very significant sleep problems. So we've seen issues with elite athletic horses traveling around, suddenly having performance issues or even falling to the ground because they're just not getting sufficient amount and quality of sleep. So these researchers are looking at a commercially available lighting system that has been designed to support optimal circadian function in horses. So there's that kind of light day cycle that we all go through. And again, this is going to be really interesting data. Again, I think horse owners would be interested to know what is the most optimal lighting I could use to get this sleep quality, which has a vast effect, as we know, as people, on our behavior and our health. Okay, so that was a brief look at how a foundation deals with what do we do about research. So just to summarize, we really, for horses, we need research that solves problems. There are a lot of problems out there. Horse owners and veterinarians are very good at identifying them, and we need to be putting the funding there. That is not to say we don't need basic laboratory-based research. There are some areas where we're just not managing to solve these problems, and that basic research is needed to unlock those areas. When we're looking at what we should fund or what we should be focusing on, we need to consult with people who know what's going on. We need to analyze that data. We need to look at what we're funding, what we should be funding, to identify the gaps that are there and to decide how we're going to prioritize. We do have a finite amount of money, so we want to use that as smartly as we can. We need to listen to the stakeholders. We're definitely taking a holistic view of health, not just physical health, not just infectious disease. And we are increasingly monitoring our outcomes. So are we making a difference? How do we keep up the momentum? So we did colic as a topic last year. We'll be returning to it next year. It's not one and done. We need to keep that funding going and keep monitoring the literature and the communications with horse owners and whether things are changing. So with that, I'll finish there. I have put my email there. We love to hear from horse enthusiasts. Do you like what we're doing? Do you not? What do you want to see? Very happy to communicate with people on LinkedIn as well. And I've put our website there. All the studies that we fund go up on that website, so you can have a look at what's happening. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing that, Julie, so we can.
Great. Thanks, Janet. That's so informative. I'm really, really impressed with all the work that you guys are doing. It's amazing. So Cliff Williamson, our Director of Health and Regulatory Affairs, and Emily Stearns, who I call our resident researcher, she's the program manager for our Equine Welfare Data Collective, have worked with Janet on a number of things over the years. And so I invited them to be part of this. Since we were pre-recording it, I thought we might have a little Q&A amongst ourselves in case there was something that Janet shared that you guys thought the audience who's going to hear this might be curious about. So I'm going to start with Emily, because Emily, I think, has worked very closely with some of your researchers, Janet. So Emily, do you have a question for Janet?
Yeah, Janet. So one thing I think that we all know is really important is we do the research and we have the results. So how do we get that information out there? And we'll have a lot of industry partners and horse councils attending and viewing this. How do you recommend they get started on places to look for information, or even people to talk to help understand some of the results or conclusions that they might be reading?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's quite fundamental to a foundation like ours. So what I would say is, firstly, every project we fund should result in at least one scientific paper. And it's not that people out in the public are going to be reading that paper most of the time, but that evidence needs to sit there. And it's from that evidence that we then start talking to horse enthusiasts. We definitely take our results out there in the press, in the media. We promote it on social media. We interact with equine media organizations. It's definitely about talking about these things in a way that people can understand to quite a varied audience. So I guess just getting it out there widely. There's some great email newsletters out there like The Horse and so forth. And I think they do a really good job of promoting what's going on there. And really, ultimately knowing if things have changed. We've sometimes seen further scientific studies to look at it. So for example, in some research I was involved in where we realized that equine metabolic disease was actually the main cause of laminitis. There was another follow-on study done recently to see if veterinarians had changed the way they thought about this, and actually they had. So I think we increasingly need to have a look and see, because if we're coming out with evidence and horse owners aren't changing, again, we've got that disconnect. And I think just getting it out there as widely as possible is just the way to go.
Great, thank you. I had a similar question, Emily, because I know that we often hear that people aren't aware of the results of a lot of this research. So it's a great question about how do we get it out there? And Janet's point about it being in layman's terms, so the casual horse owner can actually digest and understand, what the research findings mean and how to apply them, quite frankly.
Yeah. And you guys do a great job there too. And you have that newsletter, and I see you promoting researchers, and we're often looking for people to be a part of studies as well. So that's another way of getting people involved if they're actually in the study themselves, then getting that information back to them. So one of the studies I didn't go over today, because the principal investigator will be at this conference, is doing just that, just involving horse owners in the research. And that's increasingly the way research is going.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it makes an owner have a vested interest by being a part of that. So that's a really smart move. Cliff, did you have a question for Janet?
Yeah, I did. Janet, thank you for your time. It's having Morris Animal Foundation be a part of the American Horse Council has been a really great resource and a really strong outlet for the Horse Council and our members to kind of understand what's going on behind the curtain, so to speak. But my question is more about, what do you think needs to be done? You mentioned outreach quite a bit. You mentioned, you just finished talking about how people can get more involved, but clearly entities like Morris Animal Foundation need access to information. They need to know what the metrics are for the horse industry and their interests. You referenced 2 surveys that were done by the AAEP and the American Horse Council Foundation, but those were kind of one-off deals. So what do you think, or should there be some kind of consistent annual action that gets taken within the industry to make that information known?
Absolutely. I mean, those two surveys, as you can see, were really critical, because when we saw those, that was quite shocking that our funding wasn't actually matching it. And I think there are things we can take a deeper dive into with horse enthusiasts and veterinarians. So yeah, I would say maybe not annually, but certainly frequently. We've also increasingly seen scientists undertake studies, where there was one done recently on equine Cushing's disease, where they really questioned quite a large group of owners and vets fairly thoroughly and generated a list of questions that need to be answered by research. So it became really, really specific, and again, had great agreement between veterinarians and horse owners. So I think we could get more granular than those surveys we've just seen. So if we take colic, we can start digging into, well, what is it? What is it about colic, or what are the questions we need to have answered? And I think that sort of thing is a great way for our foundations and the Horse Council to really act together and start solving some of these problems.
Thanks, Janet. You know, we did a research summit last fall, brought together academia and organizations like Morris to talk about both sides of the coin. We need more research. We need to get more folks involved in research. I'm kind of curious if you guys have given some thought. We clearly heard, and Cliff, you and Emily jump in. We clearly heard that academia is very concerned that we are losing our next crop of researchers, that we don't see as many people going into the research field, which is so unfortunate. And have you guys thought about what are ways that we as an industry need to sort of feed that pipeline and make certain that we've got researchers for the foreseeable future, so that we get to the root of some of these challenges that we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it is something we've thought a lot about. We've actually increased the funding in our fellowships program now. I think there's a couple of things to think about. One is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we know this is a very significant problem. It's certainly a problem in the veterinary profession, and there's been a lot going on around it. So there are probably a lot of people out there, equine scientists and veterinarians, not really thinking about research as an option for them. It's important that we keep that funding going there. The other thing I remember coming up in that discussion also, which is something we've focused a lot on here, or certainly thought about, is that a lot of people in clinical practice or in some of the extension programs in universities do want to be a part of research, and it's a matter of trying to facilitate that. At the moment, you have to write quite a detailed proposal, you have to get it through this review board, but there's all these people out there at the front line who have a lot to kind of add to the conversation and to research if we can find a way of doing it. Actually, one of our behaviour studies is a collaborative effort between extension veterinarians, and we actually put 50,000 towards that instead of the 10 because we thought that was so valuable. So I think that's another thing that came up. And also master students. We have a lot of master students around in equine programs. And even if you don't go on to have a research career, being a part of research means you can keep engaging with it later on. So I do think there's a lot to do here, but those are some of the thoughts that we've had around it.
Great, good stuff. Emily or Cliff, do you have a follow-up question for Janet? Anything else you'd like to ask about what she's shared?
I think we covered all the questions. I had written down the questions while I was listening. I think we covered them.
Yeah, I have a very specific question, and we can cut it out of the tape if we need to. But the transportation study is really intriguing me, Janet. Are they going to be looking at different size stalls when they're transported to see if how much movement they have while being transported makes a difference? Or there's a lot of variables to that one.
Yeah, this is really basic. This is, they're going to get what they get with that transportation company. This is, with these studies, so Wendy's giving $10,000 to a study. These studies are small, looking at new ideas, getting some initial data, what's going on here. And then I think I think we'll see if they're starting to find things, they're going to start trying to work out what is the best way to transport horses then for these horses that are at risk. So this is my point about keeping on returning to topics. It's not one and done, oh, we've sorted all that out. You're looking at multiple studies over a number of years to try and build that information as you go. And we've funded other things on transportation. We've had one running on air transportation. We had a study that finished recently looking at the EU laws on transporting broken versus unbroken horses, which is a great law, but how does a practitioner on the ground work out a horse is broken or unbroken? It's just a crazy question. So they had worked out a way of assessing that. So we've had a bit of a focus on that and the various problems around transportation.
Interesting. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing some of these results. So, Janet, thank you so much for your time and all of the great information you share. Thank you for the work Morris Animal Foundation is doing and putting the importance of scientific research at the front of our minds. So thank you so much for sharing all this. And if anyone has questions, she's shared her contact information, and I hope you will reach out to her because she's a wealth of information. So thanks, Janet. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an absolute privilege, and I mean it when I say I'd love to hear from people. So please feel free to email me or get in touch on LinkedIn. We really like that interaction with our horse enthusiasts.
I am Charlene Couch, and I do work for the Livestock Conservancy. We are a nonprofit membership organization, and our goal is to preserve the genetics of breeds, essentially. So breeds that people like you and a lot of folks we know have put their lives into developing, people, or rather breeds that generations and generations have put their lives into developing, many for specific purposes and many for all different sorts of uses. So we've just talked about how many ways horses and donkeys, but equines can plug into our lives, and they're still pulling logs out of the woods in sustainable grazing activities. They are healing hearts and minds and bodies. They're doing conservation grazing, and certainly lots of horse sports that, that's probably what drew most of us here. As we have talked about, though, a lot of breed registrations fell over the last number of years, and I think that we are seeing some really hopeful bumps there toward the end. Thank you to Debbie Fuentes from the Arabian Horse Association for compiling these, because these give us sort of for us who work with endangered equine breeds, this gives us a fairly reliable guide to go by. How are horses doing? What are breeds doing in terms of registration numbers? Things look bad if you look at the aggregate there. Or across that amount of time, but there are some really hopeful signs too, and there are some breeds that are hanging on. The ones that we are concerned about at the Livestock Conservancy are the ones that wouldn't even show up on this graph because their numbers are so small. It is trying to bank this genetic diversity because we might need it again in the future. However, these breeds are awesome in and of themselves. The draft horses and the pony breeds and the in-between Akhal-Teke horses. I'll show you some more. The Lipizzan horses, the most well-known horse breed in the world, is also quite endangered. To the left, the queen. I hope she doesn't see me give this talk, but the queen is pretty aged. But she celebrated her birthday with her Fels ponies, another endangered breed. And at the bottom are some of those. I should ask you to guess what those are, but I'll go ahead and tell you. Those are colonial Spanish horses. Those are marsh tackies in particular. The colonial Spanish horses, obviously, they came here 500 years ago, but they've been in the United States that long. and in different pockets, in different locations, like the coast where the marsh tacky would thrive in that mucky going footing. They've been at locations in canyons and on rangelands for long enough that they have adapted quite well to those areas. And there's actually a little bit of research that some of those colonial Spanish horse populations, which I think we can claim as our own now, these are our American horses, some of them may be more parasite resistant than other breeds. So there are some important elements of diversity that, it's not just because these are really cool horses and we want to keep them around. There are actually very good reasons for the health of all breeds that we might want to keep these around. So equines are iconic, they are adaptable, they have an incredible diversity of genetic variety, so many different traits. I think that you guys probably have all seen the miniature horse and the great hulking Clydesdale or Percheron. All of that variation came from somewhere. It is genetic. It has been bred for a purpose. Unfortunately, a lot of those purposes no longer exist, like pulling wagons or conservation grazing, for instance. We're really on and on about this, about keeping equine genetic diversity available for our future. And I am excited this evening to talk with you in person, because collaboration is how we have sort of launched ourselves on this role for endangered equine breeds. It is collaborations that are going to keep all of us working toward the same purpose. And I just want to say I really am excited to work with y'all. So thank you. I appreciate your attention. Thank you, Julie.